Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Belpod, the podcast dedicated to Belarusian football. This week we'll take a look back over the last few rounds of league action in the Pershaya Liga and give our reaction to the conflicting fortunes of the four BPL sides involved in draws for the European competitions. We'll also reflect on a surprising departure in the Pershaya Liga before Rukh Brest Rob gives us the lowdown on his team and the city from which they hail. We'll finish off with a look ahead to the standout fixtures in week 14 as the season nears its halfway point. Hello again. It's lovely to be back with you. I have to say that, to be honest, we were wondering how much attention there would be on the BPL during this slightly important tournament that appears to be happening around Europe at the moment. But it's been absolutely lovely to see how many people are still taking a keen interest in a league that we love as much as ever. And we thought rather than talking about every single game over the last few weeks since we've last spoken to you, we'd focus on a few of the more general issues that have occurred to us in terms of what's going on with the title race, although it's not much of a race, is it, John, unfortunately?
It's been a remarkable run from Shakhtyor, 13 wins out of 13 now. I think in my own football watching career, the last time a club did that in the UK context, I think it was 1985, when Reading began the third division by winning 13 games out of 13, with Trevor Senior banging in the goals. I'm showing my age now. But it's been an astonishing performance from Shakhtyor. We did doubt them a bit in pre-season. We did wonder if stepping up from quite a poor league in North Macedonia to title challengers in Belarus would be too big a step for Dembo Darbo, but my goodness, he's taken 3 or 4 steps since he left Skopje for Sologorsk. And we saw that again in their victory over Slutsk, didn't we? When Slutsk did really well in the first half, and then Dembo and a couple of their other performers just turned on the afterburners, and the Sugar Boys got all turned into a creme brulee as a result. I would say, Liam, that they're strengthening again. I mean, those that think that Dembo and Antic and Siuka maybe all going will weaken them are in to be disappointed, because they do have players coming in already.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting to see where they stand at the moment, isn't it? We know that they've got a massive game against Ludogorets coming up in the Champions League. The first leg, I believe, is on the 7th of July. I think the transfer window opens on the 5th of July, and there's been a lot of chat, hasn't there, about teams in Russia prepared to pay serious money for Demba Darbo. I would point out at this point, John, that you said we had doubts about him at the start of the season. I can assure you that I didn't, of course. It was just you. I'm putting that all on you.
Well, I think the listeners all recognise that for the retrospective spin that it is, and go back to the original episode where you were quoted. But let's carry on.
I suppose the big question is, if some team is prepared to pay €3 million, pounds, whatever, dollars for Demba Darbo, are they going to be happy for him to play against the Ludogorets? Probably not. And we shall see. I really hope he does get his crack at that, because I really do think that that's a dreadful tie that Shakhtyor have been handed, the worst of all that they could have had in their little mini group of 6. And I'd love to see them have a real go at Ludogorets, but clearly losing Darbo just before that would be a massive blow, even though, as you say, they brought in 3 Serbians, haven't they? Is that correct?
That's right. And let's be clear, Dembo's not gone yet. And I think whilst negotiations will be going on, I think he's going to be around for the Champions League. I think it's too soon to expect that he'll move just like that. And personally, if I were his agent, I'd be saying, look, just see out the season at Sologorsk, set a record, keep doing what you're doing, and your price will just go up. And more clubs other than Krasnodar will be interested in taking you. But it's true to say that the manager's brought in 3 players from Serbia this week, all of whom have a good pedigree. The headliner probably is Georgi Ivanovic, the striker from Olimpia Ljubljana, who was previously at Partizan Belgrade, who have one of the best youth systems in European football. So that's a big, big signing for me. They've brought in Alexa Pejic from Proletar Novi Sad in Vojvodina. Proletar are a strong regional club in Serbia, and Alexa is knocking on the door, I think, of the international team. And he helped Proletar to a good finish last season. They've also signed the least high profile of them, Milos Shatura from Lados Lucani. Milos is a Bosnian under-21 international. He's from Gradiška, I think, in the Serbian entity in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So those are three strong players that would be an asset to most sides at Shakhtyor's level. And it just shows that they've had a taste of success now, but they're not going to settle for that. They're really going to push on and try and dominate the league for a few years in the way that BATE did for 10, 11 years up to 2018.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? It's very much a case, as you say, they are pushing on, and yet I suppose we therefore have to give quite a lot of credit to BATE, who are hanging on in there. I mean, I know it's a 7 point gap, John, but when you consider that the team at the top of the league have won 13 out of 13, to be within 7 points of them is a pretty impressive return from a team that I think we did both agree. I thought they'd do better than you did, but I think we both felt that they were not necessarily ever going to be serious challengers to Shakhtyor, or possibly not even to Dinamo Minsk, we felt, didn't we? So it is quite remarkable in a way that they remain within at least, perhaps not touching distance, but at least waiting for a slip up if any should happen.
Yeah, and I think we have to really credit the job that Vitaly Zhukovsky's done there. And let's not forget that in any other normal season, without a dominant club winning 13 out of 13, that record of 10 wins, 2 draws, and 1 defeat would have batted top of the table probably by a few points. The worry for me in the longer term is how BATE are going to sustain themselves, because the days of BATE having protracted campaigns in the Champions League are over for now, I'm afraid. They've also had bad news in the last 48 hours that Stanislav Dragun's got a cruciate ligament injury and he's going to be out for quite some time. For me, Dragun's been really impressive this season. I didn't think he was brilliant last year, but for me, he's been a really consistent performer and chipped in with quite a few important goals this season. So he's going to be a big miss for them, and a chance for young Shokbot Umarov maybe to step up and stop being a super sub and start starting regularly and convince the manager that he's ready to do that.
Yeah, it's been a tough on Umarov, hasn't it? I mean, I noticed the other day he didn't even get on the pitch, and I noticed that the Belarus 5 directors were cutting to him on the bench after about 25 minutes, and I don't understand Russian well enough yet, but there was certainly some Umarov chat, which suggested to me that they also were slightly puzzled by the way he wasn't starting the game. So yes, it's a great chance, and sad for Dragun. Obviously, he didn't start the season, did he? He was injured at the start of the season from a pre-season knock. Then, as you say, really got into his stride, was playing really well, and this is a dreadful blow. Interestingly, that only when players suffer cruciate knee ligament injuries do we actually know about it. They do tell us about the big ones, don't they, John? We don't hear about the ones that happen that keep them out for 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, where Wanderson's gone, for instance, if Vitebsk is quite beyond me, no idea. Just disappeared for the team for the last 2 weeks. But the big injuries, Kislyak and Dragun, sadly, have both been recorded in the local press. I suppose the one good thing for BATE recently has been the fact that they've got perhaps the best European draw of the 4 Belarusian teams, haven't they? They would expect to be playing away at Dinamo Batumi, I think, in the second round of the conference, the second qualifying round.
Yeah, and I think that's eminently winnable for them. And Zhukovsky, having won the cup and, just about hanging on to Shakhtyor's coattails and hoping for a dip in form down in Sologorsk at some point, he'll see this as another opportunity to burnish his credentials. I think Dinamo Batumi are a good side, but they're not a frightening side. They're not a Ludogorets or a Copenhagen, who Shakhtyor and Pur Torpedo are facing, respectively. So, yes, they'll want to progress against Dinamo Batumi and hope for a bigger draw and some revenue in the next round. But of course, it's kind of the European competition that in normal seasons we'd really be looking forward to and trying to assess the standard of the league against similar leagues like the Georgian League. It's all marred a bit, isn't it? Because travel from in and out of Belarus is pretty impossible at the moment because of the political situation. And, some of the surreal nature of these ties we see in Shakhtyor openly speaking of holding their game with Ludogorets, Razgrad, and Belgrade, which is really sad for them and sad for the fans in Sologorsk who've followed them week in, week out and will be looking forward to games such as this.
Indeed, and of all the fan bases that you perhaps would be most likely, I suppose, to welcome a European opposition in great numbers, I think we, as you know, I always like to bang on about what a great support Dynamo Brest have, and they have a big tie. Possibly it'll be beyond them after the first leg in the Czech Republic. But yeah, I particularly feel for them. I think there would have been a massive turnout, I think, for that game against Victoria Pilsen, pretty much regardless of what happens in the first game. And we don't even know where that game's going to be played, John, do we? Somewhere that isn't Belarus, basically.
Yeah, Victoria Pilsen's a big ask for Dynamo Brest, and their best hope is that um, the Czechs don't take the game terribly seriously, and that famed spirit that Kowalczyk has in his squad pulls them through a difficult tie. But it's a really big ask of what is a pretty young side.
Indeed. So realistically, I suppose we're looking at even it's not really even a title race at the moment, is it? But certainly Shakhtyor and BATE are well clear of the rest in terms of the top two. Down the bottom two, Sputnik. My word, John. Well, there's a story there anyway. There's a book to be written about the last 12 months of Sputnik, hasn't there? If nothing else. Really sad, a lot of it there, I'm afraid. I find it very difficult to watch that team and not feel, as you say, that the days are numbered, really. And I was particularly... One of the things that really struck me was a couple of weekends ago when they were playing at home. I suddenly realised they were playing in Rachica, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And I thought, why are they playing at home? It's almost like letting a terminally ill patient out of hospital to have the last few days at home before they pass on. And it's almost like they don't care anymore. The rules don't apply anymore because they're not going to be around much longer. And I felt really sad because there's a big crowd there, John. There's a lot of people supporting them on that day, and it was almost like say goodbye to your team that will soon no longer be here.
Yeah, there's a number of chronic problems there that can't easily be solved. Sputnik have very little infrastructure presence in Rachica anymore. They've pretty much moved lock, stock, and barrel to Gomel. They're sponsored by a Gomel firm, Stroidiapason. They cannot use that ground. I think they were probably granted an exceptional use of that ground for one game, as no other ground was available on the day. That's the only reason I can think of why they were allowed to play Dynamo Minsk there. They are hemorrhaging money. The local authorities don't care about them. All the decent loan players that they had, like Ariane Smith and Juhari, are away because they've not been paid. The players haven't had a salary this season. And ludicrously, they're talking about playing the rest of the season at Gorodea's empty ground. And now that's a 4 or 5 hour round trip from Rachica. And it makes Mogilev, the game they played there against Slavia, look almost logical. So the club is finished to all intents and purposes. And if they do finish the season, it will be because the ABFF intervened to keep them artificially alive. I think it's more likely than not, sadly, that they won't finish the season and their record will be expunged. And it's a very young group of players there now. Half the reserve team are in the first team. There is a sense that there's a bit of pride there and they're not going to give up easily, such as the 2-2 draw, I think it was, with Neyman, was it, a few weeks ago? That was a really good performance. But it's hard to see a way forward for the club in its current guise, and it's very likely that they'll be like Smolovici and in the third tier or lower next season as a completely new entity.
So whilst the future looks particularly bleak for Sputnik, Smorgon just won't go away, will they? I mean, I think everybody tips Smorgon and Sputnik to be the bottom two. Obviously, Smorgon's situation is well documented, arriving in the Pershaya Liga from 6th place in the Pershaya Liga. And it's difficult, isn't it, John? Because you can't possibly come to terms with that as a reasonable solution. We've talked about it a lot before. But it's hard not to feel a sneaking admiration for this Smorgon team, especially in recent weeks when they just will not throw in the towel. They are clearly out of their depth in many ways, as they should be, with a team that hasn't been massively reinforced since they finished 6th in the Pershaya Liga. But they keep going, don't they? And perhaps more by other teams' failings than their own brilliance, they're sneaking ever closer to the relegation playoff place.
Well, you're quite right. And I do enjoy watching Smorgon. And we have to remember that it is not the manager or the player's fault that they're in the position they're in. Gerashchenko did not want promotion, but he was overruled by the club leadership, who decided to take the place completely unjustly made vacant by the ABFF's treatment of Krumkachi in the close season. And yes, I mean, you look at players like Leonid Koval, you look at their guy Bondarenko, out on the right wing, right midfielder, Kamara in the middle of the park that we've spoken about on a number of occasions. Even Shakhtyor in goal, who I think's had a number of impressive performances at very difficult venues where he's basically been on the receiving end of a coconut shy for most of the game. And there's a spirit about them. I think, though, our friend Dimitri, who comments a lot on our Twitter page and runs his own Telegram channel, I think he's right on when he says they need 2 or 3 signings to be competitive. Otherwise, it's just not possible to see how they'll survive. And if it's the case that Sputnik do fold and their record is expunged, then that's their one win out the window as well. So they're going to be even further adrift. So they need to really pick up in the next few weeks. And of course, they were beaten the other day in the cup by Arsenal Dzerzhinsk, so they've only the league to concentrate on now.
Indeed. So I suppose our attention should turn, briefly at least, although we're already nearing the 20-minute mark, John, to the Pershaya Liga, which we've also been taking interest in this season, as always, particularly because of our fondness for Krumkachi and a sense that we would like that injustice righted this season. But they've done something fairly, something that has caused some discussion, shall we say, in the last few days on social media.
Well, yes, and Oleg Dulub has gone. And for me, that's the most surprising news of what already has been a season of fairly extraordinary stories. I have heard unconfirmed rumours that the major shareholder wanted him gone. That there's an article in Tribune this evening, which I read just before we started recording, whereby there's been little niggles and rumbles behind the scene all season about professional infrastructure at the club, treating the players properly when they're on the road, conditions at training. It's not the case that he lost the dressing room or the players didn't want him there anymore and went and moaned to the chairman that training was too hard or something. The players were really behind him. And it's a real shock to me because you cannot win a league by firing a manager after 2 games, one of which was a 1-0 home defeat to Arsenal, who were a wee bit, rode their luck a wee bit in the game. There was a feeling that Dulub played too many of his older players in that game, but okay. And a defeat on penalties in the cup to a team from the Premier League. So for a manager to leave after just 2 games, having previously been undefeated in the league, I think for me, I'm just at a bit of a loss for words. And I think it would be great to see Oleg Anatolievich back in television, where I think he's a really insightful analyst. But I'd like to see him back at a club, as soon as possible. I think he's a really good coach. He speaks really well. He treats people fairly, very obviously. The players adore him.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I think it's difficult to say. I don't think Krumkachi, it's ridiculous to say this because obviously they were top until the weekend, but I don't think their performance has been quite up to the standard that they were last season. I think they played better last season, which is ironic because obviously they didn't win the league last season. But I felt the times I watched them last season that they were just a better watch, but maybe to a newcomer to the team, perhaps he thinks he isn't getting his sparkling standard of champagne football he was looking for. But you can't deny the fact, as you say, that until this weekend they were top of the league. So it is an interesting one. I'm not sure really why they've gone, but it's a classic, isn't it? Trigger finger situation where, as you say, lose 2 games. I suppose the fact that Neyman had 9 men by the end and Krumkachi had probably 40 minutes to break them down. There's loads of things you could point to, but it does seem like a bit of a knee-jerk reaction.
But did he deserve to be fired for that? Really? Or did he deserve to be mutual consented or whatever the mechanism was that he left by? Come on. It's 2 disappointing results. And if you want someone to get you out the Pershaya Liga, he is your man. I'm sorry. It's like, I don't know, it's like Nuno Espirito Santo taking over at Swansea or something. okay, the football might not be brilliant, but he will get you out that division in the same way that people used to go to Neil Warnock for that 15 years ago. Warnock's at the end of his career now. So for me, if Croomcatch are in a situation where they need to win that league convincingly to avoid any subsequent ABFF chicanery and trying to deny them promotion. And I think doing that is a process rather than an event. You've got to build that over time. And player for player, that squad is not just better, it's in a different universe to the one they had last season. I don't care if the squad last season was more entertaining. In every position, that squad is stronger. In every position. And let's not forget that they failed to win promotion last season in a playoff against the very poor Slutsk team. So I think the man deserved a chance at least to see the season through, because I think if he'd been left alone, there's no doubt that they would have been promoted without the need for the playoff at the end of the campaign.
I have to say, I've watched a bit more of the Pershaya Liga in recent weeks, partly because perhaps not so much of it. There was a week off, wasn't there, because the international fixtures. I've really enjoyed Nepomogilev recently, John. I think they've got a really young, exciting side, obviously new to the division, but got a bit of clout behind them. Not a hugely settled side, I think, reading some of the stuff about them. There's been quite a few injuries and, they're starting to get a more settled side, but they're a really good watch. And I think they're creeping up very nicely. I think they could certainly begin to threaten for those top two spaces. If not, then certainly, I would fancy them to have a great chance of making that, that promotion relegation playoff. So we'll see what happens with that. But no, they've really impressed me recently, I have to say. I don't know if you see anything of them. Or...
Yeah, they're a good side. And they're historically, let's not forget, Liam, a very big club. They're as big a club as Gomo, you would say. And in some ways, Igor Chumachenko is not totally dissimilar. The Dnepr coach is not totally dissimilar to Bionchik. I don't think he's as good as Bionchik, but he's someone who's trying to make a name for himself there. And after the trauma of the whole Dnipro story and the farce of merging with Luch Minsk, they've rediscovered their identity. They won the third tier very stylishly last season. And as you say, I think they're showing signs of consistency now. That means that if one of the top two stumble, then they're going to be very well positioned to take advantage.
So that's it for our review. We could have spoken for at least another 20 minutes, I imagine, John, couldn't we? But we'll call it a day there. So the end of part one, and we'll be back very shortly with part two, unsurprisingly. So it's that time of this particular episode to focus on the views of one of our Belarusian football supporters who has a particular team with which they have fallen in love. And this week, this particular pleasure falls to our good friend Rob from Rukh Brest. Well, not actually from Brest, but actually from Norwich at the moment, I believe. What a fine part of the world Rob lives in. And he's going to talk to us a bit more about the city of Brest and also about how he came to be a Rukh fan and how he's found his 12 months or a little bit more as a Rukh fan.
Hi guys, thanks for having me on, and thank you for the opportunity to come on and talk about my club Rukh Brest. How did I get involved in it is probably the first question. Like most people, lockdown last year, no football going on around the world, and then I hear about this country that I've heard of, but I don't know anything about, Belarus. I look at the league table and I think, well, who shall I pick? And being a Walsall fan in League 2 in England, I'm thinking, well, let's go and pick a relegation dogfight because that's what I'm used to. So, starting from the bottom of the league table, working up, I come across the name Rukh Brest, which sounded interesting. I didn't want to go for one of the big boys. And a Belarus football team is for life. It's not just for lockdown, guys, remember. So, this is my cross to bear, and I am prepared to stick with it. I'll talk a bit about Brest, the town, first. For those of you who don't know, it's a Belarus-Polish border town. Southwest Belarus, got a population of about 350,000. It's your typical border city, I think, looking at its history, which has been quite turbulent. It's been passed from pillar to post between Poland, Lithuania, back to Poland, and then invaded by Nazi Germany in World War II, and then taken back by the Russians, right through until 1991 when it became part of an independent Belarus following the breakup of the USSR. So It's probably most famous for its military defence of the town on the very first day of Operation Barbarossa, which Hitler launched, of course, when he invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. And the town held out for an incredible 6 days. And the reason I say it's incredible was that the Russian army abandoned them pretty much from day one. And they were massively outnumbered, but put a very, very gallant and hard resistance. Sadly, most of the defendant army perished in the attack, but they're all considered now heroes, which explains that wherever you look in the city, there are a range of military monuments or memorials, and there's museums there, and the Brest Fortress is quite an impressive piece apparently as well. The fact there's plenty to keep you amused there over a weekend in terms of bars, cafes, restaurants as well. It's now a city that's on my bucket list. But I suppose I have to talk about the football team at some point. So let's just get that out of the way, shall we? One question I often get asked is, what's the significance of the badge? It's a rather unimaginative letter R for Rukh. They must have been up all night thinking about that one. And there's a 1922, and the date pays homage to a Polish amateur team around that time in the 1920s. I don't know much more about the link, but that's where the badge originates from for those of you that wanted to know. The club was set up 3 years ago as a farm club for Dynamo Brest and won the second division at the first attempt, went up into Division 1, got promoted after a penalty shootout in the playoffs to end up in the top flight last season. Of course, at that point, it could no longer be a farm club and exist in the same league as Dynamo Brest, so it split, was its separate club with its own identity. Where we find ourselves now is, we finished 8th last year in the top flight, which was a good performance for a new team. And it was a solid team that was building towards the end, but Alexander Sednev, the manager, did a decent job, I thought, but was sadly disposed of pretty ruthlessly by the owner Zaitsev at the end of the season, which saw the arrival of the much-loved Kirill Alshevsky and his brand of Kirill Ball, as we call it. If ever there was a case of throwing a baby out with the bathwater, this was it. We got rid of 8 or 9 players from last year's team, who were all very good players, including the likes of Stepanov, the goalkeeper who's now pulling up trees at Dynamo Brest, and also Vasiliev, who's doing a fantastic job at Energetic. I don't see why we let those guys go. But they were replaced with another 8 or 9 players coming in, some of whom haven't even seen the substitutes bench yet this season. We've also brought in Pavel Savetsky and appear that we don't know where to play him. So much so as that we just don't play him now, and he spends most of his time on the bench along with the likes of William and Vlad Vasiliev, who's a striker who was with us last season. So we've got good players supposedly sitting on the bench. We've got rid of a lot of good players. We've bought some nondescript players in. And like I said, it's not so much throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but I think what Alshevsky's done is we've more or less thrown the bath, the shower, the whole ensuite out of the window with 3 triplets. If ever there was over-engineering of a team, this was it. But we find ourselves in 3rd position, which is pretty pleasing. It's not pretty how we've got there, but what we have done is we started the season with 3 draws, and then the following 9 games, we've now gone and won 7 of them. We've only lost away at BATE and Shakhtyor, which is probably what you would have expected anyway. We got destroyed by Mr. Darbo at Shakhtyor, and most people know how that feels. And we lost 3-2 in what I still think was game of the season so far, away at BATE. I think come the halfway point in the season, we're pretty handily placed in the top 3, which is really what I think Zaitsev would expect as an absolute bare minimum. I think if we fall out of that top 3, I think we could be saying bye-bye to Alshevsky, because given the amount of investment on players and the change in playing staff, I just don't think anything less than top 3 is an option. We now must have probably one of the biggest squads in the league, and I think again it's another reason why failure simply isn't an option. And I don't think Alshevsky at any point can say he hasn't had the support in that department at least. I hope that tells you a bit more about the team and a bit more about the city. But if any of you want to follow me on Twitter, at FCRookUK is my Twitter handle. But the only thing I really need to say at the end of this is a big thank you again to the guys that have run BellPod. Liam and John, you've done an amazing job. Thank you on behalf of all the British fans, and you've been a valuable source of information for the last 18 months.
Great stuff, Rob. Thank you for your kind words. It's an absolute pleasure, as always, to hear from you. And I was particularly interested, John, by the sort of historical background here. It made me think when he was talking about the people of Brest, holding out for a long time, and heroic failure at the start of the Second World War. I was thinking maybe this is where the Dynamo Brest fans get their inspiration from the historical background of the people of their town who wouldn't give up, and maybe that's what they've managed to channel down there. Why so many thousands of people have rallied around the Dynamo Brest cause in their hour of need when they seem to have been stitched up. Anyway, enough about that. Let's go on to Rukh. And I know we have slightly conflicted views on Rukh, don't we? They're not your favourite team in the world, are they, John?
Not particularly. I mean, I don't think the Dynamo situation has anything to do with the heroes of the Fortress of Brest in late 1941, which of course is a major founding myth of Soviet era Belarus and held on to by some today. I think the people there just felt a tremendous sense of injustice at the way that was handled. And Rukh, well, I don't like to say I don't like them. As we were saying before we started recording, they've some very interesting players. They can be a very attractive side to watch. But the way that Zaitsev's interest was transferred lock, stock and barrel, including even the team coach, for goodness sake, from one club to the other, I think just left people with a sense of injustice and unfairness. And it's fair to say Rukh aren't popular at all locally. And it's also fair to say they've no fans. They've about 250 hardcore fans, I think. It's a strange story, I think, altogether, and one quite without precedent elsewhere in Europe. I mean, what's your take on them, Liam? We've not really spoken much about Rukh before.
I find them immensely frustrating to watch sometimes. I mean, I referenced for that the Vitebsk game last week. Now, I know that it was played in considerable heat, but you just feel that sometimes they just need to go for it. They just need somebody else. We've said before, they need somebody else in charge. They need somebody else who thinks that we've got a better team here. I mean, they're player for player, they are better than Vitebsk. It's as simple as that. They've got some cracking players. I think I really enjoy watching some of their players. I love Yuzepchuk and Pechanin. I'm a big fan, a massive fan of David Tway. I think he's one of the best midfielders in the league. And they're just a Kosovo as well. They've got some really stylish, good attacking players. Yeah. And they just pass the ball around, and it's this endless obsession that some coaches seem to have all over Europe with believing that the more possession you have, the more likely you are to win the game. If you don't do anything with it, if you don't run at the defence, if you don't move them around with a bit more speed, you're not going to get anywhere. And it was the most predictable 0-0 draw you could ever wish to see, and they are guilty of that. And I think it's a great shame. They've been very fortunate to be bestowed with great riches in the playing department, and they seem to be underachieving to me. As we've said on numerous occasions, we don't really think Olszewski is getting the best out of that team. As far as the setup, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? I really sympathise with Rob in the sense that, if you look at how he chose the team, sort of looking for a team like Walsall just above the relegation zone, we didn't know, did we, back last April, that and it's got worse in a way, isn't it? At that stage, they were just sort of a feeder team with not a great amount of support. And then obviously what happened in the winter, but you can't change your team, can you? And ultimately, I think that they can be, as I say, great to watch. I don't like the premise under which they operate, but I just think anybody who has got good players and could play good football and might mount a challenge at the top end of the league, it's good for the Belarusian game. But I don't like the model. I mean, we talked about the model before in the Belarusian Ajax model. What happens with that? That was the original plan, wasn't it? That was the original reason given for moving his allegiance to Rukh. He was going to set up the next sort of youth academy, but I haven't seen any sign of that. Have you?
I mean, well, this move's been long in the making. There was lots of rumours that he was bailing out on Dynamo and going to Rukh pretty much throughout last season. And then, of course, it happened over the winter. And I think that will happen if the socio-political conditions allow it to happen. There's not much point having an internationally focused youth academy if you can't actually leave Belarus. Yeah, in fairness to Rob too, he did quite vociferously on Twitter condemn what happened over the winter, and it is a shame for him. It's not his fault. And you do say that, I do say also that they seem to be developing a very good community side. I mean, they were very kind to Rob and sent him a lot of souvenirs signed by his favourite player, So they are good on that side, and they're trying, but they'll need to build up a lot of goodwill. And the other thing to mention, of course, Liam, is that the rumoured new EU sanctions in Belarus include one Alexander Zaitsev. So it remains to be seen what effect that will have on his wealth and his ability to finance his vision for Rukh going forward.
So interesting times for Rukh. I would like to see things stabilise. I think you're absolutely right to point that out, John. It's been one of our few bugbears, I should say, of following this league is the difficulty with getting any sort of feedback from clubs about anything really, any chances to buy any shirts. And as you say, Rukh seem to be all over that, and I think that's great. And it's the way Belarusian football needs to go, as we've said before. They need to find ways of increasing their revenue streams. And not being so dependent on the state, but obviously one of the best ways to do that is to build up your fan base. And at the moment, the premise under which they were founded makes it, I think, very hard for them to do that.
I think if Zaitsev does lose the ability to fund them in the manner to which they're accustomed, they'll probably be able to raise about 10 grand by selling off last season's first team shirts, which were the subject of near erotic fixation from football shirt obsessives around the world. It was a very beautiful green strip last season, but I remember one slightly disturbing tweet about the green and grey combination and how beautiful this was from someone or other back in the day. So I think they can raise a bit of money if they sell off their old shirts. Top tip for their commercial department.
I couldn't get used to those grey socks. They just were bizarre, weren't they? I looked at them, just looked like something out of a boarding school, didn't it?
Horrible. Yeah.
Quite bizarre. Anyway, enough about Rukh. That's the end of part 2. And thank you for your time, Rob. Really much appreciated. And as always, very entertaining and very informative. We'll be back shortly with part 3. So, John, it's the home straight. It's talking about this weekend. We've missed out loads of details about the cup, but we had to get to this point. And what would you like to talk about in terms of this weekend's fixtures?
Well, looking at the fixtures, Liam, and let's start at the bottom of the table. There's a massive game at the Unost in Moser on Saturday when Energetic are the visitors to Slavia. And this is, I know you run the prediction league every week and you really enjoy doing that and seeing how everybody does. That's the hardest game of the weekend to predict for me. You just don't know which of these two sides are going to turn up. And if I remember rightly, Energetic demolished Slavia and Molodechno last season, but I think they lost one of the last games of the season down in Moser. So it's kind of hard to predict which way that one will go, but a game with potentially massive implications and one that Slavia need to win far more than Energetic. A draw is fine for Energetic down there, but if Slavia can win, then they begin to breathe down the neck of the likes of Energetic and Sliutsk again. So I think that's a game. It may not be the standout game of the weekend, but it's certainly one that could have massive implications for the relegation playoff later in the season.
And I suppose Slavia, although they've been woefully underwhelming all season, will have taken great heart from the fact that they were completely out of the game against Neman last week for 86 minutes and ended up drawing 2-2. That's got to be the most undeserved point I've seen all season.
It was jaw-dropping, and they really mugged Neman. I've no idea what Neman have done to merit this streak of abysmal luck that they're on. I really couldn't believe that. I'll let you into a secret. I had the full-time tweet writing off Slavia as a bunch of Hades and hammer throwers, which they clearly were. And then they got 2 late goals, one after the other, as Neman's concentration and self-belief evaporated like cold water in a tank's mudguard in the desert. So just the most extraordinary result, and that will have felt like a win to them. I'm sure the coach on the way back to Moser was absolutely bouncing, and it was a while ago now, though, so whether it's going to carry forward into this game against Energetic, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose Energetic also would feel that they were quite hard done by last week at FC Minsk. They certainly dominated the second half against the usual Energetic snooziness just after the break. Snooziness at the start as well cost them 2 goals in total, and they just couldn't get back into it after that. But they pretty much dominated that second half without getting a draw. So, as you say, you just don't know. The week before, they came back from 2 behind to beat Gommel. So, both teams are very difficult. The hardest one to predict, as you say. Of course, we haven't mentioned the Predictor League, that since we last spoke on this podcast, we have a perfect 8, don't we? So congratulations to Connor from the Uzbek Football, who basically managed to get all 8 right, and then very modestly said, "Oh, it was just all guesswork." I think you got a 7 last week, John, didn't you?
I did. That's my first in what's been a largely sort of mid-table Dynamo Brest type performance this season. So,
talking of Dynamo Brest, they are perhaps involved in the game of the week. They go to Shakhtyor. I suppose, again, you can't expect anything other than a home win there. Dynamo Brest, though, have shown in the past that when they need to keep a clean sheet, not so much recently, but certainly their defensive qualities have shone through. I like that Afi's back in the team there. I don't know if he was injured again. He went off after 20 minutes in one game, wasn't seen for about 6 weeks. I do think Afi is an excellent centre-half for them. He's going to have a busy weekend this weekend, isn't he, at Shakhtyor? But we don't know. I mean, that's a possibility. Looking at fixtures, BATE Torpedo obviously will interest you as well, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, a bit of a local derby. Clearly, it's not the Bell Classical, the game between BATE and Dynamo Minsk. But BATE and Torpedo is always an interesting game. It's a very local derby. The two places are just up the road from one another. And of course, it's Big Yuri returning to the stadium where he made his name as a coach in the 1990s. Torpedo, for me, have been really disappointing this season. They've also had Neyman Grodno style luck for a lot of the time. But I think the 2 Brazilian players they've brought in really haven't lived up to expectations at all, and it's been really telling for me that Puntus has been very reluctant to play them. Certainly, not really starting them very often. So I think BATE should win quite comfortably, but it'll be interesting to see how Yuri sets the team up and who he puts in his starting lineup, because he's a great thinker and you can often learn a lot by the way that he sets his team up. And of course, Torpedo are further hampered by the loss of Khachaturian, their talismanic number 10, for the rest of the season. The poor man's got an anterior cruciate ligament injury, and that's a massive blow for them. He's such an important player in the Torpedo engine room.
Of course, there's one other derby as well. It ought to be in Minsk, but it won't be in Minsk, will it? Because these lots are currently playing in Molodechno. So it's going to be, I don't imagine, sadly, there'll be a huge attendance for that one. But 2 sides, and with contrasting fortunes. I mean, Isloch has shown in recent weeks without Komarovsky, they really are a bit of a blunt nail, aren't they, really, to be honest? And FC Minsk, you never quite know what you're going to get with them. We still feel that they're probably overperforming in terms of what we expected from them pre-season, but could be interesting. I'm obviously fascinated to see if Smorgon's very mini revival continues at home to Gommel. I can't see it myself. I think Gommel, despite the fact they've had players sent off in their last 3 games, are still a joy to watch. And I will tell you what, John, what I like about them as well, watching last week. Now, I don't like crossbar challenges and all that nonsense, but I feel that Gommel, above all teams, and perhaps we talked about Rukh in terms of their work on social media, I feel a sense of fan engagement at Gommel. I feel a sense that, okay, so maybe the crummy halftime competitions aren't for everybody, but there's a sense that they want people to get involved in the team. There's over 4,000 there last week, John. I think there's a team there that really could be going places. I don't know if they can sustain it. The squad's not particularly deep. Solove, I'm sure, will be getting attention even in this first transfer window of the year. But, there is a real buzz about them at the moment, isn't there? They're
a great team to watch, Liam. You're quite right. And it's not just Solove, it's the likes of Kastrov and Pobody and these sorts of guys who you look out for every week. I really like the way Bionchik is such a inventive and flexible coach. His first team lineup and their formation always surprises me every weekend. So goodness knows what it's like for the coaches opposing him. I think you're rightly identified that there's a real closeness between the Gommel support and the first team. There's a big political angle to this and the pressure that players are under to sign a pro-government letter. And I think there's kind of a bond between the fans and many of the players who won't sign it. And I'm afraid there are rumours in the background of the team being broken up and various young players being threatened with the army if they don't sign. So there are lots of things going on behind the scenes there. And to be able to play like they did against Isloch, to turn in the performance that they did against Kuchuk's Dinamo a few weeks back away from home, to go out and play with great joie de vivre in an early rounds cup tie at Orsha this week, that shows a real mental toughness on that side and a togetherness with the support that perhaps hasn't been there for a while in the troubles that they had at the end of the last decade.
So lots to look forward to as always. I hope you managed to stay with us for a slightly longer period of time than you usually have to hold your concentration to listen to us talking about Belarusian football. It has always been an absolute pleasure, John, to talk with you about this league that we love so much and the league below it that we also love very much. So thank you for your time and thank you for sticking with us through, as I say, a time when there's an awful lot of football going on out there. It's been great to hear from all of you during this period, and we'll be back again a bit sooner next time.
Certainly we'll be back sooner than Scotland will be at an international tournament. So thanks for listening, everybody, and look forward to seeing you next time.